Blessings. Welcome to today's Law Enforcement Daily Devotional. Today we are in 2 Kings chapters 2, 3, and 4. And a lot of good read. Just, it's like reading a novel when you get into these kinds of stories where there's kings who are ruling and there's battles and things going on. And honestly, it's like reading the Lord of the Rings for me. It's just really cool stuff. But there was a good takeaway today that really applies to our field training programs that we have at our works. And how good a job are we doing at picking the people who train law enforcement officers, the people who are responsible for giving them the knowledge and the understanding, yes, but who lead by example. And these should be men and women of integrity who, when they go out on the call every day with these rookies, that the rookies can watch how they act, how they treat people, and get a sense of what a true servant of their community looks like. And that is so very, very important. And where that comes from today, my thought is, the Bible doesn't just spell this out. It's just something that I've had as far as a takeaway over the last several days and even weeks as we've read through Kings. But chapter 3, verse 3, Jeroboam keeps coming up. Now, Jeroboam was a king that we haven't read about in quite a while, except for the fact that he continues to have influence on kings from generation to generation. And if you remember Jeroboam, he was the very first king of Israel. And he was, when Israel and Judah split, Jerusalem's in Judah, and Jerusalem is the center of worship. Well, Israel didn't have a center of worship, and this king was afraid that his people would go back to Jerusalem to worship and then come back home, go back to worship, and then slowly recognize the authority that God had placed over Israel and Judah was the king from David's line who lived in Jerusalem. And he was afraid basically all the people would either go to Jerusalem or they revolt against him and try and make one kingdom. So his bright idea to change this, to keep them from going to Judah and Jerusalem to worship God, was to put up all these little temples and places of worship for false gods and idols, that they would have some place that they could go and worship. and thinking that they would forget about God and they would just worship whatever's most convenient. And he was right. They did worship what was most convenient, and they quit worshiping God. Now, the next king was Nabat, not Nabat, I got those backwards, Nadab. And it says Nadab followed in Jeroboam's ways. And then there was Baasha. And then the fourth king was King Eliah. And then there was King Zimri and King Omri. And then King Ahab, who was pretty evil himself. But Ahab continued to follow in the ways of Jeroboam, who there were 5 kings in between the two. So there were many generations that passed. And then there was Ahaziah. And now we get to Joram, who is the king of Israel. And it just struck me today in verse 3 where it says, Joram followed in the sins of Jeroboam. Man, there's been 8 kings in between the two of them. There's been a lot of years passed by, and people are still struggling with the same sin that this one guy did probably over 100 years ago. But it's still prevalent in their society and in their culture, and it's still a stumbling block to people. And you think of all the generations of people who quit worshiping God and worshiped idols because of this one person. And one man, one woman can have that kind of effect. And we like to think of this ripple effect when we talk about good people and the good example and the good legacy that they left behind. But it's also true of the negative, and we see it here. And like I said, that just kind of struck me as, man, someone who teaches the next generation, and then they take that teaching and teach the next generation, and then so on and so on and so on, and they're still living in this teaching of this one evil, bad person. If we have a bad FTO who's doing that, how far-reaching, how much damage does that do to generations to come? At the same time, when you got good FTOs with a lot of integrity and they share that, same thing. So just a good reminder for law enforcement to pay attention to who we put in the position of field training officer to teach our rookies, because it is very, very important. It's probably one of the most important jobs that we have in a police department. So, good takeaway. Tomorrow we're in 2 Kings chapters 5, 6, and 7. So I will see you tomorrow, and be safe.